The park bench had seen better days. Its green paint was peeling at the edges, one of its wooden slats was darker than the others, a replacement, poorly matched, and it sat at the quietest corner of Maplewood Park, half hidden beneath the canopy of an old oak tree whose roots had slowly buckled the ground around it over decades. Thomas Byrde loved it for exactly those reasons. Nobody came to this bench on purpose. People passed it on their way to the fountain, to the playground, to the coffee cart that smelled of cinnamon and oat milk. But they never stayed here, and Thomas needed a place where he could simply exist without anyone looking at him the way people had been looking at him for the past year, that tilted head, soft-eyed look that said, "We heard about your wife, we're so sorry," before their mouths even opened. He watched his son, Noah, from a distance. 8 years old, dark-haired, serious in the way that only children who have known quiet grief can be. Noah was crouched by the edge of the duck pond 20 meters away, methodically tearing a piece of bread into perfect squares before dropping them one at a time into the water. He had been doing it for 20 minutes. Thomas had timed it without meaning to. That was a thing he did now, measured time. Since Claire died, time had become strange. Some hours lasted 3 days. Some weeks were gone before he registered them, but he tracked the small things obsessively. 20 minutes of bread dropping. 14 ducks. One boy who still hadn't smiled on a Saturday. Thomas exhaled and looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. It had gone cold 15 minutes ago, but he kept holding it. The warmth was a memory at this point, and memories were something he had become very good at holding on to. He was so far inside his own thoughts that he almost didn't hear it. Almost. "Can I sit with you?" Welcome to Kindness Arena. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen connections that change lives, please help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. Help me show her that stories like this matter and deserve to be heard by hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, comment your thoughts, where you are watching from, and share it with someone who needs it to stay motivated. Your support keeps these powerful true stories alive. The voice was barely above a whisper. So quiet that for a moment Thomas wasn't sure he'd heard it at all, though maybe the wind had moved through the oak leaves in just the right way. He turned his head. She was small. Younger than Noah, maybe 6, with 2 uneven pigtails, one higher than the other, and a coat that was buttoned incorrectly, one side hanging lower than the other because the buttons were off by one. She had very large brown eyes, and she was clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest with both arms, the kind of rabbit that had clearly been washed so many times it had lost most of its original color and nearly all of its stuffing. She was looking at him with the particular expression that only very young children can manage, completely earnest, completely unguarded, with not a trace of the social anxiety an adult would feel asking a stranger if they could share a bench. Thomas looked around. The park was busy enough. Families, joggers, a group of teenagers sprawled on the grass further up the hill. He scanned for a parent, a guardian, someone who might belong to this small girl with the lopsided buttons. "Of course," he said, "because what else do you say to a child looking at you like that?" She climbed up onto the bench with some effort. It was a little high for her, and settled herself with the seriousness of someone conducting important business. She set the rabbit on her lap, smoothed her coat, and looked out at the park. They sat in silence for a moment. "My name is Silvia," she said finally, without looking at him. "With an I. Not AY. People always spell it wrong." Thomas found, for the first time in a very long time, that the corner of his mouth wanted to do something. "Note it," he said. "I'm Thomas. Do you live near here, Thomas?" "A few streets away." She nodded, as though this confirmed something she'd suspected. "We just moved here. We're on Chestnut Road. In the yellow house. It has a gate that makes a sound." She paused. "My mum says it builds character, living somewhere with a squeaky gate." She said the phrase builds character the way children do when they're quoting adults with a faint tone of skepticism. Thomas smiled. Actually smiled. It surprised him, the ease of it, the way it arrived without announcement. "Where did you move from?" "Bristol." She said it with the weight of someone who has come from very far away indeed. Bristol was approximately 200 miles from London. "My mum got a new job. She designs things. Logos. Do you know what a logo is?" "I do. It's the little picture on things. Like on your coffee cup." She pointed at the faded paper cup in his hand. "That little drawing there. Someone had to make that. My mum makes those." "That's a wonderful job," Thomas said. Silvia considered this. "She stares at a screen a lot, but she seems happy when she gets it right." She stroked the rabbit's ear absently. "She's over there." She pointed, and Thomas followed her gesture to a woman sitting on the grass about 30 meters away, cross-legged, a laptop open on her knees, chewing on the end of a pen. She looked up just then, spotted Silvia, and gave a small wave. Silvia waved back with the rabbit's paw. Thomas waved too, instinctively, and the woman smiled, a polite, grateful smile that said thank you for not being a reason for me to panic. Her name is Mum, Silvia said matter-of-factly, but other people call her Donna. Is she always working? Not always. Silvia thought about it. But mostly. She says work doesn't stop just because it's Saturday. She looked up at him sideways. Do you work? It was such a simple question. Thomas turned it over in his hands like a stone. He ran 4 companies. He sat on the boards of 2 charitable foundations. He had people who managed his assets. He had made his first million at 29 writing software that simplified supply chain logistics for mid-sized agricultural businesses, which was so boring to explain that he'd stopped explaining it years ago. He had a portfolio of investments that his accountant reviewed with him every quarter, and each quarter he more or less said yes, that's fine, whatever you think is best, because he genuinely could not make himself care very much about any of it anymore. A bit, he said. Silvia accepted this. That's my son, Thomas said, nodding toward the pond. Silvia peered over. The one with the bread. The one with the bread. He's very organized about it, she observed. He's doing it in a pattern. She squinted. Clockwise. Thomas looked. She was right. He hadn't noticed that. Something moved in his chest, a small, warm shift, like a coal-catching light. His name is Noah, Thomas said. Is he nice? He's the best person I know. Silvia seemed to find this a satisfying answer. She leaned back against the bench. Does he want to be friends? We don't really know anyone here yet. It gets lonely. I've been talking to Mr. Flops. She held up the rabbit, but he doesn't have a lot of opinions. Thomas laughed. A real one. Short and quiet, but real. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done that in public without having to perform it, without someone having told a joke at a dinner he'd attended out of obligation, everyone laughing because the occasion required it. This laugh was involuntary and honest, and it felt like something unclenching in his ribcage. I think Noah would like that, he said. He doesn't know many people here either. Silvia nodded. Grown-ups find it easier, she said sagely. They can talk about boring things like work and it counts as conversation. Kids have to actually like the same stuff. And what stuff do you like? She listed it with the efficiency of someone who had given this considerable thought. Frogs. Maps. Custard creams, not the ones with the extra thick biscuit, the normal ones. Stories where the girl goes on an adventure and doesn't need to be rescued. The color green, but not lime green, that's different. Rain, but only from inside, and I want to learn to sail, but we can't afford lessons yet. Thomas listened to all of it. He listened in the way he had forgotten how to listen, without waiting for his turn to speak, without composing his response while she was still talking. He just listened. Those are good things, he said when she was finished. She looked up at him properly then, for the first time, and studied his face with the uncensored curiosity of a 6-year-old. You look like you've been sad, she said. Not unkindly. Just as an observation, the way she'd observed Noah's clockwise bread pattern. A fact she'd noticed and decided to mention. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I have been, he said. Silvia nodded slowly. She didn't say I'm sorry the way adults did. She didn't tilt her head. She just accepted it as another fact, and then, after a moment's consideration, she did something unexpected. She took Mr. Flops, her beloved, faded, deflated rabbit, and placed him carefully on the bench between them. You can borrow him for a bit, she said. He's not very good at opinions, but he's good at sitting next to people. Thomas looked at the rabbit. He looked at this small girl with her misaligned buttons and her pigtails and her enormous matter-of-fact eyes. Something that had been held very tightly in Thomas Byrde's chest, held for 12 months, through the funeral and the phone calls and the paperwork and the business meetings he'd attended on autopilot and the evenings he'd sat on the edge of Noah's bed making sure his son was breathing quietly, without fanfare, without any drama at all, began to loosen. He picked up Mr. Flops. He held the small, battered rabbit in his large hands, and he looked out at the park, at Noah, still methodically feeding ducks, at Donna on the grass with her laptop and her pen, at the fountain catching light in the distance, at ordinary, unremarkable Saturday afternoon life continuing on around him, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was inside it rather than watching it from behind glass. Thank you, Silvia, he said. She was already looking back out at the park, at her mother, at Noah by the pond. You're welcome, she said simply, as though it were nothing, as though 6-year-old girls offered their rabbits to sad strangers on park benches every day of the week. Maybe they should. Across the park, Noah finally looked up from the ducks. He turned, and his eyes found his father on the bench. He tilted his head. His father was sitting with a small girl and he was holding a rabbit and was his dad smiling? Noah stood up. He brushed the breadcrumbs off his hands in 3 neat, careful swipes and then he walked back across the park toward the bench, slowly at first, and then a little faster, the way you do when something you've been waiting for, something you couldn't quite name but felt missing seems suddenly, quietly, to have come back. By the time he arrived, Silvia had already turned to greet him. "You're Noah," she said. "I'm Silvia. With an I. I like frogs and maps. Do you want to be friends?" Noah looked at his father. His father looked at him. Something passed between them, soft and unspoken, the private language of 2 people who have been very sad together for a long time. "Yeah," Noah said. "Okay." And the old bench with the peeling paint held all of them, the boy and the girl and the quiet millionaire and one very well-traveled rabbit, while the afternoon tilted slowly toward evening, golden and unremarkable and, for the first time in a long while, enough. Some doors don't knock. Some doors whisper. "Can I sit with you?" And everything changes.